They said it would be just another talk show appearance. But the moment Donald Trump walked onto that bright red couch, everyone in the studio could feel something was about to explode. The air itself seemed to shift, heavy, electric, unpredictable. Graham Norton, known for his sharp wit and calm control, greeted him with a polite smile. But behind that smile, there was curiosity, maybe even caution. He'd interviewed hundreds of stars, prime ministers, and legends, but none like this. The audience applauded, though it wasn't the usual cheer. It was hesitant, half excitement, half fear of what might happen next. And then, the tension began to build. Trump leaned back, adjusting his tie, that signature confidence radiating through every move. Cameras zoomed in. You could almost hear the producers in the control room whispering, "Keep rolling, this could be history." Norton's first question was simple, harmless, even. "Mr. Trump, you've been called one of the most talked about figures in modern history. How does that feel?" Trump smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. "It feels tremendous, Graham. People love talking about me. I bring in the biggest ratings, maybe even bigger than your show tonight." The audience laughed, but uneasily. Some with him, others at him. And Norton just sipped his wine, the tiniest smirk on his face. He'd found the spark. What started as a friendly conversation was slowly turning into something else, something raw. Every question was a step closer to a fire waiting to ignite. "You've had your share of controversial moments," Norton continued. "Would you say controversy follows you, or do you follow it?" Trump leaned forward. "I don't follow controversy, Graham. I follow truth. And truth makes weak people uncomfortable." That line hit the audience like a punch. Some clapped. Others just stared. But Norton didn't flinch. He was too smart for that. "Interesting," he said smoothly. "Because some people might argue that your truths often need correcting." The air froze. You could almost hear the heartbeat of every person in the studio. Trump's eyes narrowed, his jaw stiffened. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was an ego war on live television. And the world was about to see who would blink first. Pause, narrator tone softens, drawing viewers in. Little did anyone know, by the end of that night, one of them would walk out mid-show, and the other would walk into television history. The atmosphere in the studio was shifting. What began as polite laughter was turning into uneasy silence, the kind that fills a room before a storm hits. Graham Norton had interviewed politicians before. But never one who turned every question into a battlefield. Every word from Trump landed like a declaration of war, confident, bold, and wrapped in defiance. "Fact-checkers say your claims don't always hold up," Norton said lightly, swirling his glass of wine. "Does that ever bother you?" Trump's response came fast, sharp, almost rehearsed. "Fact-checkers are fake news, Graham. They lie. I tell the truth, always. People know it. They trust me more than the media." The audience murmured, shifting in their seats. Norton smiled again, not the amused smile of a host, but the calculating smile of a man who knew he'd just stepped on a live wire. "That's quite a claim," he said softly. "So you'd say you know more than scientists, journalists, even experts?" Trump didn't blink. "I know more than most of them, probably all of them. I've been right about everything." For a brief second, the camera caught Norton's expression, calm, collected, but his eyes sparkled with disbelief. He set the glass down. "Everything? Including climate change? Even though some of your own properties have faced its effects?" Trump waved his hand dismissively. "Climate change is a hoax. Made up to hurt America. My properties are fine. Beautiful. The best. Ask anyone." The tension thickened. The laughter stopped. It wasn't entertainment anymore, it was confrontation. You could feel the room holding its breath. No one dared move. The cameras zoomed closer. Even the background music had faded into silence. And then Norton said the line that changed everything. "But Donald, if you're always right, why does it seem like every time you're challenged, you get angry?" That question, simple but piercing, was like striking a match in a room full of gasoline. Trump's face tightened. His smile vanished. The room temperature seemed to drop. "Angry? I'm not angry, Graham. I'm passionate. I don't let lies go unchecked. That's strength, something you wouldn't understand." The audience froze. A few people laughed nervously, unsure whether it was still okay to laugh. Norton leaned back, studying him like a scientist observing a rare animal. His voice calm, his words surgical. "Maybe. Or maybe it's because you're not used to being questioned." Trump's eyes flared. He leaned forward, voice rising, the performer giving way to the fighter. "I've faced tougher people than you, Graham. Presidents. World leaders. You think you can rattle me with your little jokes and your wine?" The room gasped. Even Norton's trademark grin faltered for a split second. But he didn't back down. Not an inch. "Oh, I'm not trying to rattle you," Norton replied, his voice low and measured. "I'm just having a conversation." The silence that followed was deafening. Two men. Two worlds. One fueled by charm and wit, the other by ego and dominance. And in that clash of personalities, you could feel something snapping, something irreversible. Narrator tone deepens, like a trailer ending. This wasn't just about ratings anymore. It was about power and pride. And soon, the studio would witness something no talk show had ever seen before. By now, the energy in the room had shifted completely. What had started as a casual talk show felt more like a courtroom, and Trump was on trial. Only this time, the judge was smiling and holding a glass of wine. Graham Norton leaned forward slightly, the red lights of the studio reflecting off his glass table. He wasn't smiling anymore. The jokes were gone. The audience could sense it. They weren't just watching television. They were witnessing a collision of two worlds, charm versus power, humor versus control. "Mr. Trump," Norton said calmly, "you've always claimed to be a man of the people. But do you really believe the people still trust you, after everything?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Trump's lips curved into a smirk. "Graham, people trust me more than anyone. They know I tell it like it is. I've done more for real Americans than any president before me. The fake news won't tell you that, but the people know." The audience didn't clap. Not this time. They were watching too closely, too unsure of what would come next. Norton nodded slightly, his tone polite, almost gentle. "And yet," he said, "some of those same people were out in the streets protesting you, even flying a giant balloon of you over London." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience, small, nervous. Trump's face hardened instantly. That balloon was made by losers. Sad, bitter people. They can make balloons because they can't make change. "I build things, Graham. Real things. Not toys." Norton's voice dropped to a whisper, every word cutting through the tension. "Still, that toy seemed to fly higher than your approval ratings, didn't it?" The laughter came again, louder this time, but now it wasn't nervous. It was dangerous. The kind that feels like betrayal. Trump's eyes narrowed, the smile fading. He wasn't used to being laughed at. Not like this. Not in public. Not by someone who wouldn't back down. "You think this is funny, Graham?" Trump snapped, voice rising. "You're disrespectful. You bring me here for your ratings, then attack me for entertainment. Pathetic." Norton didn't blink. "Attack? Oh no, Mr. Trump. I'm simply asking questions. That's what conversation looks like, though I understand that might be unfamiliar territory." The room erupted, half the audience gasping, half applauding. Trump leaned forward, pointing his finger toward Norton. "You don't get to talk to me like that. You wouldn't last one day in my world, Graham, not one." Norton stood up slowly, calm as ever, his voice steady and sharp. "You're absolutely right," he said. "I wouldn't last a day in your world, because your world runs on chaos, not conversation." The crowd went completely silent. You could feel the weight of every eye in that studio focused on them. Two men, standing inches apart, divided by pride and power. The cameras zoomed in. Neither blinked. Narrator voice drops low, cinematic echo effect. And in that frozen moment, the audience realized this wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a breaking point. A man known for control had just lost it, on live television. Beat pause. And what happened next would make global headlines before the night was over. The silence inside the studio was almost suffocating. Every camera was locked in. Every heartbeat echoed louder than the applause ever did. For a moment, even the air seemed afraid to move. Donald Trump stood there, staring at Graham Norton, eyes blazing, chest heaving. The show's red couch, the lights, the laughter, all of it now felt irrelevant. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was personal. "You think this is funny?" Trump's voice thundered, his tone shifting from irritation to rage. "I came here to talk, not to be mocked by some TV comedian who hides behind his wine glass." The audience gasped. You could see the shock on their faces. They weren't watching a guest anymore. They were watching a storm unravel. Graham Norton stayed seated, calm as a monk in the eye of chaos. "Mr. Trump," he said quietly, "I hide behind nothing. But it seems you hide behind everything. Your power, your pride, your need to always be right." Trump's jaw tightened. His hand gripped the arm of the couch so hard his knuckles turned white. "That's not hiding, that's strength," he fired back. "I've built empires, I've run countries, I've made history. And you sit here making jokes. You think that's courage?" Norton leaned forward slightly, the room dead silent. "Sometimes," he said softly, "it takes more courage to listen than to speak." The words hit harder than anyone expected. For a brief second, even Trump didn't have a response. The audience watched, hypnotized. Two men, two definitions of power. One fueled by dominance, the other by calm defiance. Trump finally broke the silence. "You're lucky this is your show, Graham," he said, pointing toward the cameras. "Because if this were mine, you'd have been off that couch 5 minutes ago." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but they died quickly. Norton's next words cut through the tension like a blade. "Donald, you've spent your life walking out on people who disagree with you. But tonight, you might want to stay. Because for once, people are actually watching you, not your performance, but you." That was it. The trigger. Trump stood up, fast, the microphone crackling as he yanked at his jacket. The crew froze. The audience gasped. Graham didn't move. He just watched, calm, unflinching, almost sympathetic. "You want to walk out?" he said softly. "Go ahead. But remember this moment, because the world will." Trump glared at him, face red, voice trembling with fury. "You think you've won something here? You haven't. You'll never understand what real strength looks like." Norton smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Maybe not. But I do understand what control looks like, and right now, you've lost it." The audience gasped again, some in shock, some in awe. The camera caught Trump's face, frozen between rage and disbelief. And for the first time all evening, he had nothing left to say that was the moment the show stopped being a talk show and became television history. The studio didn't just witness an argument, it witnessed a meltdown. And what happened after this would leave the world divided and the internet on fire. The world had seen Donald Trump debate presidents, confront journalists, and dominate crowds, but no one had ever seen him like this. Not cornered. Not challenged. Not silent. The studio lights burned hotter than ever. Trump stood at the edge of the famous red couch, his face tight with anger, his hand still gripping his jacket. For once, the applause had died. All you could hear was the low hum of the cameras, and the tension between two men who refused to back down. "You think you're winning here, Graham?" Trump said, voice trembling with restrained fury. "You think your little show will change anything? I built empires. I led a nation. You pour wine and crack jokes." Norton didn't move. His voice was calm, eerily calm. "Maybe. But tonight, the world isn't laughing at my jokes, Donald. They're watching your reaction." That line was it. A single sentence that split the room in half. Trump's expression hardened. He turned to the audience, his voice booming. "This is what the media does. They twist everything. They make you the villain for speaking truth. I came here in good faith, and this is a setup." His words echoed across the stage. But something strange happened. No one cheered. No one clapped. For the first time in his career, Trump was talking to a room that wasn't buying it. Norton rose from his seat, glass still in hand. "Donald," he said quietly, "you don't need a setup to show people who you really are." The words hung there like a mirror, and Trump hated what he saw in it. He grabbed his jacket, snapped his microphone cord loose, and began to walk toward the exit. The crowd was frozen, some in shock, some in awe. The camera operators followed his every step, the sound of his shoes against the floor echoing like gunshots in a church. Norton didn't interrupt. He just watched, his expression a mix of sadness and clarity. When Trump reached the door, Norton spoke one last time, his voice steady, almost gentle. "You don't have to leave, Donald. But if you do, remember this moment. Because strength isn't walking away from questions, it's facing them." Trump paused, just for a second, his hand on the door. Every camera zoomed in. Every eye in the studio waited. But he never turned around. The door swung open. A burst of light from the hallway spilled across the set, and then he was gone. The audience sat in complete silence for what felt like forever. And then, Graham Norton did something no one expected. He picked up his wine glass, looked straight into the camera, and said softly, "Well, that was different." Laughter erupted. Applause followed. Not because of mockery, but because they knew they had just witnessed a moment that would be talked about for years. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. Trump storms off Graham Norton's show trended worldwide. Some called it humiliation. Others called it justice. But everyone agreed on one thing: the world had just seen a crack in the armor of a man who never liked to lose. And as the credits rolled, Graham Norton sat back on that red couch, sipped his wine, and smiled. He hadn't won a fight. He had revealed a truth. The door had barely closed behind Donald Trump. And the world had already begun to react. Within minutes, the clip hit every corner of the internet. On social media, hashtags exploded, #Trump walkout, #Norton showdown, #Red couch meltdown. News outlets replayed the footage in slow motion. Trump standing, pointing, leaving. Norton sipping his wine, calm and unbothered. It was the image seen around the world, pride colliding with poise, power meeting patience. Across the Atlantic, major U.S. networks picked it up instantly. Anchors analyzed every word, every gesture. Some said Norton had humiliated a former president on foreign soil. Others argued Trump had been baited by leftist British media. But the truth was simpler: it wasn't politics anymore. It was personality versus pressure, and the mask had cracked. Inside the BBC offices, the producers couldn't believe the numbers. Ratings had tripled overnight. Clips of Norton's calm smile were going viral. Comments flooded in, thousands every hour. Norton just did what no one in America dared to do. That was pure courage. He didn't argue. He exposed. But not everyone was cheering. Trump's loyal supporters turned the internet into a battlefield. Tweets called for boycotts, rallies, statements. Within hours, his team released an official response. President Trump was ambushed by a biased host and misrepresented on international television. The show was a disgrace. It only made things worse. Clips of his walkout gained tens of millions of views in a single night. People weren't just watching, they were re-watching. Analyzing his tone, his posture, that final glare before the door shut. And through it all, Graham Norton said nothing. No interviews. No statements. He didn't need to. The silence itself became part of the legend at BY Morning. Commentators were calling it the moment America met its reflection. They said Trump had built a career controlling rooms, but that night, in a quiet London studio, he lost control of one man who refused to play his game. Across talk shows and podcasts, debates ignited. Was Graham Norton disrespectful, or brave? Did Trump overreact, or finally show his real self? Every voice had an opinion. Every outlet had a headline. But one clip kept circulating above all, the final 20 seconds. Norton, sitting alone on the red couch, raising his glass to the camera. That tiny, calm gesture said more than any headline could. It wasn't victory. It was understanding. Because behind the laughter, behind the chaos, there was a message, one that millions quietly absorbed. You can build towers, run countries, and command crowds. But if you can't handle a question, the world will handle you. Pause, narrator's tone slows. The internet didn't just move on. It remembered. And in that memory, something shifted, forever. Days turned into weeks. But the echoes of that night never faded. The clip of Donald Trump storming off Graham Norton's set had become more than just a trending video. It became a cultural mirror. A reflection of how far pride can go, and how easily truth can break through silence. In living rooms across America, families re-watched the moment. Some laughed. Some argued. Some just sat in stunned quiet, realizing they hadn't just witnessed an interview, they'd witnessed a revelation. Because behind the lights, the laughter, and the late-night banter, something deeper happened that evening. A man who had built his identity on dominance, finally met someone who didn't flinch. Someone who refused to shout back, refused to fear him, refused to feed the storm. And that's what made the moment powerful. Not the anger. Not the walkout. But the calm. Soft pause. For years, Trump had shaped headlines. He decided who won, who lost, and who got the final word. But that night, the final word belonged to a British host with a glass of wine, and a message that echoed across borders. Strength isn't walking away from questions, Norton had said. It's facing them. Those words lingered, long after the cameras stopped rolling. They were shared, quoted, turned into posts, stitched into TikToks, turned into memes. And whether people loved or hated him, one thing was certain. No one would ever forget the night Donald Trump met Graham Norton and lost control of the room. History will remember it not as a meltdown, but as a moment when conversation reclaimed its power. A reminder that true confidence doesn't shout. It listens. And as the world watched that red couch glow under studio lights, it wasn't just a talk show anymore, it was a turning point. Pause, camera fades out, narrator speaks softly. In a world that rewards noise. Sometimes, silence wins. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, then don't just scroll away. White right pointing backhand index, hit the subscribe button so you never miss the stories that challenge power, reveal truth, and show the human side behind the headlines. Fire comment below. Who do you think was right, Trump or Norton? Let's hear your voice. And remember, Truth doesn't always come from the loudest voice. Sometimes, it comes from the calmest one.